Well, I think we should get started. Thank you everyone for being here tonight. If anyone needs Spanish language interpretation, go down to the globe and you can select that. Could someone translate for that in English for me? I mean, in Spanish for me. Marilyn or Carla, could you come up?
My kid.
Yeah, that's very nice, Erin. But Marilyn or Carla, could you just tell in Spanish that people can go to the globe if they need Spanish interpretation? Okay. I know that Mayor Murphy and Peter Tallman, they're assigned to the Spanish channel already, so they can't say it. Does anyone I should have just got this. Does anyone speak good enough Spanish that they could just say out loud if someone wants Spanish language interpretation, go to the globe interpretation at the bottom and select that?
I can do it. I was busy. Si alguien necesita interpretación, que por favor la presione el botón abajo, se parece un globo que dice interpretación. Okay, gracias.
Perfecto, gracias. Mine would not have sounded like that. Thank you, Will. Mayor Murphy and Councilor Tallman are going to be just maybe 15 to 30 minutes late because there needed to be a special meeting of some city councilors tonight or something. I don't know exactly, but they'll be here shortly. And I wanted to welcome Josh Garcia, who won the election on Tuesday. So he's going to be our new mayor effective November 15th. We're fortunate that he's very familiar with the middle school building project, having 2 fourth graders and a wife in the system and being involved with the campaign a couple years ago. So he's starting from a strong place. Thank you, future Mayor Garcia. Is there anything you wanted to say? Not to put you on the spot.
Oh, thank you, everybody. Erin, thank you so much. Happy to be here. We'll continue to do what we can to support the work that you all are doing so that as we proceed forward and navigate what we have to do, that we're doing so together within the parameters available and the laws available. So thank you.
Great, thank you. And then we have a couple guests here tonight. So we have people from our architecture firm that we worked with before, Dory and Christian, they'll come on later, and also Margaret Wood, who is our owner's project manager, Devin Sheehan, who was the chair of the last school building committee, might try to join us. And then we're also trying out so that we can, just since there's so many people involved, we're trying out that maybe some people who are not voting members, they can follow along and watch, but they're viewing this as a webinar. We'll try that out today and people can offer me feedback on that. So let me get to, and then Jackie's helping me run tech. So if you need anything, she'll be monitoring the chat, or you can, text her too. So first of all, I didn't receive any public comment. Does anybody want to make public comment? Okay, people can always, you can always email me, elinville@hps.holyoke.ma.us for anyone who's following by 3 o'clock the day of the school building committees. If you would like to submit public comment, or I will read it aloud, or you can share live. All the to-dos from last time were done, so I just wanted to thank everyone for that, and especially Whitney, who was my partner in submitting the educational profile and the enrollment questionnaires a couple days ahead of the November 1st deadline. That was a big one. So I just appreciate everyone who, especially Whitney, who contributed to that. And then now we are 13 minutes ahead of schedule. This is a super efficient meeting. We're at that part of the agenda at 6:20. Where we're going to understand the previous feasibility process and schematic design proposal. Since Devin is not on, I'm going to pose the first two questions to Margaret. We're going to pose the next two questions to Dory and Christian, and then they're just going to speak for a little bit of time. They're just going to speak for a little bit of time, and then we'll open it up to everybody, all this voting members to ask questions. So the questions that are listed in the agenda for starters for Margaret, can you help us understand from the last time we had a school building committee, what types of decisions did that committee make and not make? And then what is the role of the owner's project manager?
Okay. Can everybody hear me? Ooh, I'm going to take my headphones off. That sounded really bad. Is this better?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. So hello, everybody. So let me talk about the role of the project manager here. I mean, the way I think about it in a nutshell is that in municipal government and in school districts, everyone already has a job. So when you take on doing a building project, it's a whole other job to manage. And so the way that is managed within the Mass School Building Authority funding process is that the School Building Authority wants you to bring on someone who is trained as certified as a project manager. I'm actually an architect by training. I worked as an architect for many years, but I've been an owner's project manager for going on 18 years now. And frankly, I love it. And I particularly like working on schools. So I'm glad to be back meeting with you all again. But my role would be to work with the district and the city to do all the things that they would do if they had the time or knew what to do in a nutshell. So that means I'm typically, the OPM is the conduit to the MSBA. So, you know, they like to have like a single point of contact. So communication goes back and forth. I'm there to explain procedures, to helpfully, you know, fill in the blanks of things that people might not understand or need direction on. And I also sort of provide a kind of side sort of comment from the side on the designer's performance. And my office or someone from my office reviews documents, signs off on documents and submittals that go to the MSBA. And it's sort of, it's the job of being your representative on the project. Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions about that? I will say that in 2004, the state passed legislation that any project that involves more than, I think it's $1.5 million of public money needs to have an owner's project manager. Now, sometimes within the city or within the district, those projects are managed in-house. In this case, it's a kind of unique project, and the MSBA funding triggers this requirement that it be typically an independent person. So, Erin, can you repeat the second question?
Sure, that was actually the first.
Oh, that was the first
second question is, what types of decisions did the previous school building committee make? Kind of like what's in bounds and out of bounds.
Okay, so I'm going to try and make a list. I probably should have written something down before the meeting, but I'm going to try and do this from memory. So in approximate order, the building committee typically makes the decision about who to hire for an OPM. The OPM assists them with making a decision about who to hire for a designer. The OPM and the designer then assist the community with reviewing and signing off on an educational program for the building. It's actually for the district, but its focus is the project. Doing a site selection, looking at alternatives. So you're typically required to look at a minimum at a renovation option, a renovation and expansion project, and a new construction option, but sometimes there are more. So the committee decides how many iterations to look at. The committee works with the OPM and the designer then to compare those options and to pick one that is the best fit. The best fit is defined as the project that best satisfies the educational program, which is why they want you to do that first, as well as is the best value to the community. So that's a decision point. It's probably the biggest decision point in the process, and it involves looking at costs as well as educational program fit. I think I just want to pause on that because I think it's really important that people understand that the MSBA really does not see this project, this program, this funding stream as being just fixing buildings. They want to see the money that is invested to be raising the overall educational capacity of the districts. And so that's why the program piece comes first, then you look at options. And then finally, so now you've picked an option, the designer is developing this option to a level that a cost can be depended on for the purposes of signing a funding agreement with the MSBA and for the purposes of the city committing to fund it. Dory, how'd I do? Any questions about that? That was a lot of stuff. Come on, there's got to be a question. Okay.
Mark, feel free just to go off. You don't need to wait to be called on.
Oh, okay. So how long did that whole process take before, from the time they went out to bid to hire the OPM to the time they hired you, and like what were the costs? I'm just thinking of, what we're looking at going forward.
Yeah.
And how we proceed, because we have those decisions to make.
Right. So the selection of the owner's project manager, if you're starting from scratch, usually takes 3 to 4 months. I know that probably sounds crazy, but you're doing it somewhat in partnership with the MSBA. They have to sign off on your advertising documents. Once you pick someone, you have to take in proposals, you have to do interviews. Once you pick someone, the MSBA has to sign off. So I would say 3 to 4 months for selecting the OPM and another 3 to 4 months for selecting the designer. So typically it's about 8 months before you're really sort of starting on the design process.
Okay. I was just going to say, and then, looking back after that 8 months, to get to the schematic design that we had, like, how long was that time frame?
I think, it's a little hard to look back on this one because we started with one building and then we changed it to 2. But I mean, I would say crudely, you could think about it as, from the time the designer's on board, a year or a little more than a year. For a typical project, just to give you an example, I'm working on a project in Amherst now, the Amherst Elementary School, which, like your project, they're sort of rebooting. They're going to try and do that in a year, but they have a potentially very contentious argument within the community about the site.
Yeah.
So if they didn't have that contentious bit, if everybody was like, we agree it should be here, I think that, the 1 year it's fast but doable. So, in this case, it's not knowing exactly how many sites we might look at. the way I would think about it is it won't be less than a year, but it shouldn't be more than a year and a half. And the difference in that range is the number of things that are potentially contentious.
Yeah, thank you.
Mark had also asked about the cost.
So the thing I did do before this meeting is I went back and looked at what was proposed for the previous project. And for the purposes of this discussion, I'm really just going to talk about the initial project we did in Holyoke. The original appropriation for that project was $800,000. And our share of that was about, looks like it was about 225,000. And then the rest of it was the designers. You know, I think kind of like the timeline I just gave you, this really depends. Our fee is probably going to be fairly comparable because our fee is most strongly related to duration. The question about what the designer's fees would be, I think is very much about how many options you look at. So, you know, in the MSBA format, you know, you have to look at many different options, like in Amherst, how many different sites are you looking at? That piece of the work is where the variation comes in. So I'll let Dory and Christian, you know, speak to their side of it, but it's easier for me to say it's kind of going to be in the range of what we had before if the duration is similar. For them, it's about range of options. So Dory and Christian, do you have an opinion about that?
We've talked about it a little bit. Again, we haven't heard yet what the community's intent is. Usually the way the process works for us is the owner's project manager comes on first, and they work with the community to then describe the work that the designer is being hired to do. And interestingly, I remember when we interviewed for this project, we get very little information. We don't know where it's going to be except for the name of the school that's a subject of study. We have only a vague idea of the duration of the project. And you don't know if the community has the capacity to pay for the project. None of these things are known. So you're really kind of going into it with very little information. And a lot of what we're doing is helping you in that phase of feasibility, determine the scope and scale of the budget by bringing design options to you and exploring your questions and bringing the information to you. The fees were determined right away on that prior to that. But what's different this time is not knowing yet what your scope is, or what your service needs are from us. So there's the option of, again, sort of starting from scratch and doing everything, again, looking at multiple sites, as Margaret's saying, or there's the option of potentially picking up from where we left off. And that's a pretty broad range to react to. So, you know, we're imagining basically that for us, it's essentially a proportional question. If we're doing a quarter as much work, then it's a quarter as much fee as last time. It's kind of the easiest way to think of it. So we've imagined that if the project is, we feel the design was very strong and does meet the district's needs. If we're able to just pick that up, refresh certain things, respond flexibly to your needs within it, and then move forward, it could be $100,000 to $200,000 to get back to the beginning of design development. I have a screen that can help explain the timeline a little bit better, that if you want, Erin, I can share.
Yeah, that's great. Questions that we had submitted that people had mentioned last time, Dory, that I think your presentation might touch on, but just to be transparent with everybody is what happens during feasibility, and can you explain the PEC design from last time and why certain decisions were made? And then if, as we consider a financial allocation to enter feasibility, how much money would the city set aside if we were to use existing plans as the basis versus starting from scratch?
Erin,
So
can I
you should be able to present.
Before she keeps going?
Sure. Sorry, I didn't notice your hand.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. Okay, so hi, Margaret and Dory. It's nice to see you guys again. Welcome back. into the fray. So the main thing I couldn't help but notice, Margaret kept saying, like typically we have to do like all multiple site plans and all of this stuff. In this particular situation, will the MSBA allow us, if this is what the committee chooses to do, to pick up, as we're saying, where we left off to an extent and just decide to go with, the PEC location and the PEC site and a PEC design? Or do we need to do our due diligence and look at multiple locations and multiple designs? Are we allowed to kind of go around that time frame of the process, that timeliness of the process?
So that, Erin, it's the same question that Dory and I have been, and Erin have been talking about. I don't know the answer. And to be honest, because you needed to go through this process, neither Dory nor I have engaged the MSBA about it.
Okay.
I would hope so. That they would kind of, at the very least, give you a streamlined version of this.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think, just to make the comparison to Amherst, so, it seems like the Amherst project, if you try to sort of put a finger on why the vote wasn't successful, there was a lot of disagreement about both the location and the size of the building. Right. The disagreement in Holyoke, we think, was at its heart, at least a significant piece, was about the sheer size of the project, 2 buildings versus 1. That does not mean to me that there doesn't need to be conversation in the community about these options. There does. There unquestionably does, and there has to be a kind of relative community consensus as well as building committee consensus. But I would like to think, because this situation is very unusual for the MSBA, they've had a couple of situations like this, but it's pretty unusual. I'd like to think that they would give us a kind of short circuit. I don't think they would say you don't need to do that at all. I think they would look like for a shortened version, trimmed down version of their usual process. They wouldn't just invent a new process that's not in their DNA.
Right.
Yeah.
So I know
to add on to that, from my conversations with the MSBA, they do want this school building committee and especially the new mayor to consider the location. Now, that doesn't mean we need to go out last time and do a big study on 5 locations, but we do need to have that conversation about it. So even us having the conversation doesn't necessarily mean that it would cost us money to have the conversation. If we wanted to explore new sites, I think that's when it starts to cost us money and significantly more time. I know they're eager to meet with the new mayor, once appointed or once officially in, and Josh could talk to them about some of this too, and probably next meeting or the meeting after we might have a little more clarity. And they also wanted us to look at a model school. Once again, it's not like we have to go, they at least want this committee to make decisions and be knowledgeable about that, and then be knowledgeable about why the group came up with what they did last time, and if we feel like it fits how tightly it fits our needs. So I think it is some revisiting, but if this group decides a lot of the work from last time was prudent, then a faster process, less money. If this group was no way, this is so off base, then that's when it becomes longer and more expensive. But it's kind of up to us.
I guess with that too would be the process of hiring the project manager. Would we need to interview multiple and explore multiples, or can we go straight with who we worked with last time?
Lori, would you want to speak to that? Oh, you're on mute.
You're muted.
Okay, great. Good to see everybody tonight. In terms of restarting the procurement process for the designers and project manager, I was asked by Mayor Morse back in February, if we were to undertake this, what does this this initial step look like? Would we have to restart that process? And so I consulted with Attorney Barnes at the time, who was our city solicitor, and I had some in-depth conversation with Deb Anderson, who is the in the Attorney General's office under the construction. There's not, because it's so unique, it's not really defined if you need to or not. It's clearly not defined that you have to rework the procurement. And so in light of how the last project ended up, it wasn't a termination of the project. It was a project that, in an effort to get funded, it did not get funded, but it never stopped. So in essence, my feeling is that we do not have to go through the steps to re-procure our current design team, because the first time around we went through all the steps legally. We had a very robust interview process and went through all of the steps. And so it's outlined in my letter, supporting that. I have not heard, and I don't feel there's any pushback to that. So in terms of, can we retain the current design team? I'm very solid, and I feel very confident that yes, because, I've had conversations. This letter's been with the MSBA. It's been reviewed. I sent it to, pardon me, I'm coming off another meeting here. Deb Anderson. So she's aware of what was submitted to the school department and up to the MSBA. I will say that I am very much in favor of keeping the design team that we have. If you look, and Aaron, that 600-page document on Google, if you were able to skim through that, not only have we satisfied procurement requirements legally, I think if you were to review some of the documents and have participated in the outreach efforts, the amount of time that many of us previously put in and in developing the relationships, I feel it's almost not, I feel like it's almost like a no-brainer. If you look at the amount of time that Margaret and her team put in to help the previous school building committee, kind of keeping everything moving forward, education, the communication between the district and the MSBA. I don't think we could do better. And then we bring in, I feel, a very top-notch, competent design team that has done the work. And we have the blueprint, we have product from this process. We have blueprints, we have reports, so much legwork has been done to either the Peck School or Lawrence that, in my mind, from a financial standpoint and just from a work standpoint, the MSBA is not going, my understanding is, unless that's changed, the MSBA will not reimburse the second time around the OPM and designers or that process. So we have to consider that. What does that look like? And the second piece is, if you look at the partnership that the OPM and the design team has brought to the district and to the community, I don't know, it was fascinating to me, the amount of outreach, communication, meetings in City Hall, and then putting forward designs that we have. I don't think it makes sense to start again. I mean, it just doesn't seem, I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. I think, in my mind, the biggest obstacle to the last project was the financing. And so now that we have kind of identified that, we've downsized, we've kind of committed instead of two schools, now we're looking at one with the financing in the internal operating budget. That takes a lot of anxiety, ajna, things off the table with a debt override vote. I think the MSBA, they were very much in favor of the design because They were very green, very clean, very modern, and they fit what we were looking for. So as we look going forward, I think it would be in the best interest of the district to keep our design team, because they're the author of the documents that we have. And if I feel like at some point we can use these documents, because so much of this technical work has been done. But if we're going to use these documents, I think it would be, it seems like, why wouldn't we want to work with the authors that have done all of this legwork for us and over and above, and has continued to stay engaged with the district, continue to answer my questions, offer support, because basically this is a continuation of the first project. The first project, I feel it was the financing. There were no issues. We did our diligence with site visits. What was the MSBA? What was their temperature? We knew that, and we were able to move forward and come up with some different scenarios. So we've done a lot of that legwork, and then it had come down to two schools, Peck and Lawrence. So I just think that we're in good waters in terms of, you know, do we need to procure? No, this is an extension of the project, and now it's a little bit modified, but it's still the project. The MSBA is very much aware of the work that has been done. They've accepted our submittals, and from my understanding, they were very much in favor of the design and the components as it relates to the needs of the district. So at the end of the day, I think we need to consider if we're going to, if it's the will of this committee to start over, we're looking at the timeline, 8 months to bring everybody in and to do our diligence, plus the cost. We're starting over again. There's going to be more time for potentially new folks to come in and have conversations with the receiver, with the mayor, and the building committee. You know, Christian and Dory and Margaret and their teams are familiar with the district and our needs and our unique challenges. And I think that they have done the legwork and have presented to the best of their ability their best options and plans to us. So now we're in I think, a very favorable position to take all of that information that we have and that everybody has done, and to kind of, you know, hone it in and kind of get this to the finish line. That is my hope.
Thanks, Lori. And I think that Dave had a question, and then we'll go to Dory to make the quick presentation. Dave?
Yeah, thanks. I think my question was pretty much answered, but we're not, I just want to clarify that we're not locked into the PEC site. Because we also have the same work was done on the other site near Lawrence School. So we would possibly have the option of going with that, because I looked through that, you know, that lengthy 900-page document that Lori mentioned. There's a significant cost difference probably because of all the demolition and so forth. So I just want to clarify that you know, other considerations aside, we still have the option of going with a different site other than the PEC.
Yeah, Erin, can I speak to that for a second? You know, relative to the question Erin Brunel asked, yeah, I do think the MSBA is going to expect some version of an evaluation of options, and I think that's a really good one. I think I've heard different opinions about this, so I think it is a very good place to start in terms of thinking about options. And Dave, you're exactly correct. The delta between the two sites in the previous iteration of this was mostly the demolition, the abatement and demolition, although the cost of the site work at the PEC site was also a little bit bigger, because the site is, if you all know, sort of has more topography and levels, and where the downtown site is really, you know, pretty flat. So
and also that that one for Lawrence could probably be more easily adapted to a different site because it's an empty lot, whereas the PEC has that, that sloping ground. So so that had to be very specific.
Yeah. I don't know if Superintendent Soto or Whitney want to say more. We did put in the statement of interest for the PEC site, and I do want to point out that the ongoing operating costs of the PEC site, the operations side, is like 600 grand a year approximately versus 300 grand approximately at Lawrence. So it is our most expensive building to run operationally. So I do think we should have the conversation. We need to look holistically at it. Superintendent Soto or Whitney, did you have anything to add on? I know you have a lot of experience with this with them.
I'll just say briefly that we did have this conversation, I want to say 4 or 5 months ago with someone at the MSBA. We did submit a statement of interest to review the PEC site. So that is the school that's under review right now as part of the feasibility study. That doesn't mean that construction has to happen there. But that unlike the last time, we're not going to be reviewing a bunch of different sites. It sounds like their expectation is look, you guys resubmitted a statement of interest, and it was for the PEC site for 550 students, and that's what the review is going to be of. But it doesn't mean that construction can't happen elsewhere. To reiterate what Aaron was saying, I do have significant concerns about PEC. If we choose to, if the desire of the city is to build a new school somewhere else, there are some very significant challenges that we're dealing with at PEC. The electricity being one of them, and then safety. Whitney did a walkthrough with some building committee members. I think a couple of years ago. There's an hour-long video that explains a lot of the challenges that you can see, that you would see. So if we do build somewhere else, like there's going to be a significant cost to investing in PEC. They're going to need new windows. They're going to need a new roof. They're going to need a new boiler. They're going to need an entire new electrical system at some point, and that is going to be very, 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 very costly.
And with that, there will be no reimbursement for those costs if that is not a primary statement of interest opportunity that's granted by the MSBA. So that would be a subsequent project if Chestnut Street was chosen. Consequently, any immediate repairs that were needed in order to keep that building functional would be absorbed 100% by the city.
Yeah, hasn't the MSBA made it very clear that they will not finance any repairs to PEC because they think it's beyond that point? So, but I mean, for the purposes of keeping the meeting moving, this could all be talked about in our subcommittees or, later on in the agenda, I think.
Very good.
Dory, let's go to your presentation, and then we can open up some questions about like schematic design and why the different pieces were chosen last time of the design.
Great, thanks. Can you all see that?
Not yet.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now?
Yes.
Yep.
Great. Okay, so just stepping back into what probably feels like ancient history, but I will tell you that in our office, I've refused to let anybody archive the Holyoke project because I always had faith that you all would be back here again. So this is at the top of the screen is the schedule for that project, very obviously simplified schedule, but just to reiterate some of what we've been talking about. So you're in eligibility right now, and you're about to step into feasibility and schematic design. And in the last project, we did the feasibility study and then schematic design, and that line's somewhere in there. And that is typically roughly a year, as Margot was saying. And then the red line represents sort of where the project stopped. And I think what's important to note there is that design is also happening right after feasibility. And I know there's been a lot of discussion about this, but design continues and takes roughly a year to develop the construction documents that are going to the general contractor. So the good news there is that even though we've done a great deal of design and I think it's a strong design, there's still a lot of work to be done after, even if what you were doing was just picking up on this project and moving forward. And that's helpful to know. What I'd say you're not able to shift out of, if you were to kind of retain that, is the enrollment and the scale of the project. There's some things that are quite clearly sort of set by the time you kind of come to the end of these schematic processes. So, but assuming that you are going to have to do some level of this, this is the general window of time that you're kind of usually looking at. So the goals of the feasibility is actually for us broken into 2 phases in and of itself. There's the PDP phase, which we've been talking about. And I'd say one of the most important parts of the PDP phase is the district writing its educational plan. And this, I am sure the MSBA will insist that you do again. They'll want to verify, now that you don't have a 2-school project in hand, which was clearly articulated in the last education plan, that you develop a new plan that is clarifying what you're doing, given that you aren't heading towards 2 new middle schools. So they'll want to see that you've really thought through what that's going to look like. A lot of that educational plan comes out of a visioning process typically, and this is what Lori was mentioning that we did, which involves analyzing district data, doing surveys. Our part of it is to do a lot of focus groups within the district, and Whitney was a part of bringing us and gathering together the arts faculty from across the district, the science faculty across the district. And the tricky thing for Holyoke at the time was there not being a dedicated middle school experience. People were coming from high school and elementary schools to help us think these things through. So those conversations are what drove the educational plan, together with working with our educational planner, Laura Wernick, and working with a consultant with the district. But ultimately, it's the district's responsibility to deliver that education plan and to be sure that it's going to stand the test of time for the whole district. And then our job during that time is to explore the different site options on your behalf, and assess existing conditions. So in the first round, that was originally Lawrence, and that means sending in engineers to do code analysis, systems analysis, in the case of the Chestnut site, soil analysis, that level of work at each instance. So we did that for Lawrence, Chestnut, and then Peck. And those documents are helpful to determining what you could salvage in a renovation, what you could do new. And those are options that you have to explore. So we have to gather that information and have done that. In that first phase, you then also are helping the committee, you all, by determining a range of cost based not on any design, but based on the preliminary program. So you know how many students there are, you know what the MSBA's guidelines are, you've done an analysis of the educational goals, talked about how many classrooms, how classrooms are structured, what other spaces are going to be in the building, and you've determined a rough preliminary square footage program. And based on the size of that program and other schools around the state and your construction window, you develop a range of potential project cost at that point for the different options. And if you're looking at 5 options or 3 options, you get a range of cost associated. And that's just to give the committee that information as a touch point to help them make decisions. After that round of just preliminary range determination, the committee will narrow to a couple options for further review. And at that point, we really start developing floor plans and massing options and looking at it on site. So that's when we started looking at reno and addition at Lawrence, and really looking more closely at Chestnut and at Peck. And at Peck, we were looking at reno options, new options, a variety of different ways of looking at it. And we start to kind of look for the most efficient way to do the project as a whole. At that point, we're starting to review the project ideas in more groups, parent committee groups, things like that. And we're trying to have a cost benefit analysis conversation with the school building committee. And they narrow along that process, usually to a smaller number of options for which we write engineering and architectural narratives of the proposed project and start to develop enough floor plan and elevation material that people can provide a little bit more strong cost information. We then get preliminary cost information at that point of the final options, and then give the committee an opportunity to select the preferred option. And that, as you will recall, is the frustration for the community sometimes, but it is a process that's sort of in place. So you certainly want to kind of have this conversation. You represent the community in making that choice. Once you've determined your final schematic option, then we go into schematic design and we develop the first set of real architectural drawings. I mean, that's where if you've seen them, there's large stacks of drawings, and it's not like a home. It's very, very detailed compared to most construction projects because of the scrutiny the project goes under at the state level. But that set of drawings, which takes quite a few months to develop, is where we start really putting material decisions, and there's still wall moving and still final resolution of the project. They want you to be very thorough so that at the end of that, they can really analyze costs. So we go another cost estimate. We actually have it reconciled with a second cost estimate. And the basis of that number forms the funding agreement with the MSBA that will really drive the project forward. And that's the point at which essentially, in our process, we kind of had to hold and wait until the community could make a decision about financing. Some highlights from the last process, just to talk about how, to answer your question about how things went that time. So I just wanted to stress that the focus groups that we led included and would again include working with you all in district leadership to do focus groups about your vision. And I do think vision and educational plan are really critical in the early phases of the project. We did those subject area focus groups throughout the district quite extensively. Every project's different. What felt necessary in Holyoke was to create a design advisory group of educators. So this was a select group of about 8 to 10 faculty who were actually given a stipend to work with us to review work as we were developing it. And that I've never seen a district do, but the reasoning behind that was that they wanted to sort of start to develop the potential faculty to go into the school. So middle school as a model didn't really exist at Holyoke yet. And there's that discussion about, you have to ultimately plan for the professional development for the school as well. So these educators were really, really helpful and insightful to us throughout the process. And then there were the community forums that were held, and we held 4 community forums in the feasibility phase prior to even, doing the forums that you may recall we did later. And then we supported the district. And then, as I think we've already talked about, the different options that we reviewed. And ultimately, it's really the committee's decision to determine that final scope that's appropriate, and be able to talk about that further. Our job is just to keep bringing you the information and answering your questions. So then I wanted just to take a moment to talk a little bit about what that educational plan was, because the design is based on it. And I think that a lot of this is still in place. COVID's changed a lot of things. So there is undoubtedly a revisiting of some educational goals in any district right now because of COVID. It's changed a lot of people's assumptions about how technology is used, what social experience is essential, et cetera. So, but I think this list of things that I would say, kind of came out of the educational goals for the project continued to be true. The district wanted to raise expectations of middle school students and prepare them for the high school experience, because that's where the district saw a gap, a problem that was affecting the high schools and the elementary schools. So it was about that. They wanted to create opportunities for hands-on learning and collaboration to really foreground the pathways that students would be exploring in high school by giving them a general observation, an opportunity to consider those ideas. But also because developmentally adolescents need that kind of learning opportunity. And it was about making a shift from elementary experience to adolescent learning. They wanted to really review and bring back things that had historically been a major thing in Holyoke, art and music education in particular. And we heard a lot about art, music, and STEM, but art and music continued to surface throughout the city as real concerns and priorities for developmental reasons, but also for esteem building was, I think, a lot of it, and continued to be a conversation. They wanted to encourage better team teaching, and that's a physical thing to us, because how do you structure a school to allow for team teaching? And they wanted to bring support closer to the classroom, which is unique to this district. I did not hear that as much in other school districts, where they wanted small spaces near the classroom so students weren't required to go 2 stories away to see a reading specialist. They wanted admin and support counseling up where students were learning, so that students had fewer transitions and were supported in their learning. They wanted to promote physical, social, and emotional well-being of students and teachers through better and healthier design and environment. And obviously, there's been talk about, the PEC school and its challenges. I think that was just generally both the specifics of the school environment being healthier, but also acknowledging that many students came to school, with a higher level of health issues sometimes. And the school needed to provide for that. So for instance, in this plan, at an unusual level, there was an expanded health clinic to provide additional services because many students received extra support at school rather than out of school in health and mental wellness. And then finally, a big key driver of the design is the idea that the school is a community resource, not just a school resource. So how do you make the school safe and accessible and something that can be used year-round by the community to really be sure that you're not just thinking about the academic day, but you're also thinking about the enrichment opportunities beyond the academic. So to walk through PEC, since that's the question you posed, and I'm not going to go into all the details on the design because I know we want to do this quickly, but generally just to see what you're going to see here, what you're looking at are 3 identical floor levels for a school for 550 students. And essentially the teaching is organized in such a way that they create communities at each wing, with the center part, the connecting point between those wings being where those extra support spaces and specialized classes are. A major hallmark of the design was that at the first floor, you have those really special spaces, the music and band room, the cafeteria, the media center, the health clinic. I'm trying to remember what DC is. So you have spaces that would be useful to the community after hours, so that you can essentially secure the upper levels and use the school more widely beyond the school day. And that was a really big part of it. PEC's geography is very tricky, the topography. So the gym, which at the other site is down at the same level, which is quite handy, at the PEC site is raised up because it has to be. It was the only way to do it and make it all really kind of fit and work out equitably between the 2 schools. The goal in that project was for the 2 schools to be as close to identical as possible, and that was a compromise of topography. Again, one thing to point out, there is that larger health clinic and the security design so that things are fairly centrally organized. Students can move through the middle of the building to get to those locations in the school. Just a quick look at the site plan, just to give you a rough sense. And again, I'd say site is the most schematic. One of the things that's tricky and interesting about every site has its own advantages and disadvantages. But what was interesting to us about the PEC site, we were drawn to wanting to improve the dingle. We saw that as both an adversity and an opportunity. And we did not feel it would be responsible to not address the dingle because it's right next to the school. And it had grown up from the old days. I think when it was built, it was probably much more daylit than it is. So that would have added to the cost of the project, obviously, to make that a little bit more safe and secure. We rerouted the circulation to make a stronger connection to the high school and to keep buses and parent drop-off separated. And we obviously did what we could to improve the parking plan, which is a very unusual site, and it's got this kind of dagger-shaped sort of parking area. And we tried to bring as many amenities to the site as possible to make it, an enriching opportunity for students. So they have things. If you've been to PEC, you've seen the sad little play area. We wanted to be sure that it was a space, and increasingly you're seeing schools trying to use the outdoors more. So I don't think that was a mistake. So those are things that would have evolved in the design further, but just generally, you can see by the contours, the challenge that it's a stepping site. And you're probably already familiar with that. So just a quick overview of the site plan. I'll stop at that. I have more information. Hopefully, if anybody has any questions, we can go through some of the iterations or diagrams, or I can show the chestnut site if that becomes a subject. But I'll leave it there for now and go back to questions.
Story, Erin?
Yeah, so hypothetically speaking, if we picked up the exact same plan, what would the cost be in comparison to what it was 3 years ago due to inflation, construction cost elevations, things like that? Do you have a like 3%, 4%? I know when we were trying to get it passed then, we kept talking about the importance of doing it now, doing it now, doing it now because of these exact reasons. So I'm just curious what we think, how much more money would that exact same plan cost in today's environment?
I'll try to answer that, but and Christian, I'm inviting him to start joining the conversation. But a couple things to note. First off, the design, I would assume that there's still opportunity to do some value engineering. There always is. So I don't think we're at the point where we have a finalized design. And second, in terms of inflationary costs, typically you're assuming 3 to 4% per year. You're correct. That would have held true, except for this year. As you're probably aware, there's been a huge supply chain problem with construction materials. So it's a lot more unpredictable right now. We are seeing a pretty significant rise in cost of construction. And the thing about a project this size is that the materials themselves are not, it's not like just because there's a 20% increase in the price of steel, the whole project goes up 20%. It's definitely not that. It's certainly higher than 4%. That's why we have estimators, so that they're looking at it closely, and I would say, guess maybe more like 7% per year at the moment is probably a rough guess, rather than the 3 or 4. But we'd have to kind of be answering the question, what's the trend line, and how does that look? Margaret, you may have better understanding because you're dealing with a variety of projects.
Well, I mean, I mostly agree with everything Dory says. Yeah, I think what's really weird about the market right now is that some things are like impossible to come by and other things aren't. So, the latest thing I've heard is, God forbid that you're trying to buy steel decking right now because there just isn't any, right? So I agree with everything Dory said. The thing I would also say is that I definitely hope, given the timeline that she showed, which is sort of pretty typical, I'd really like to think that the supply chain issues that are still kind of the wobbling out of the COVID impacts would be reduced. But what is really important for you all to know is that the way we manage that is we actually do, as Dory mentioned earlier, competing estimates. So we get at every stage of this, and particularly for this piece, which is the schematic design estimate, which is the basis of your funding agreement with the MSBA. We're really looking at a very high degree of detail, and we're having 2 estimators look at it in parallel, and then we reconcile them. On top of that, the project budget, which is kind of the piece that's on my side, Dory and Christian are managing like how the building comes together, and I'm managing the project budget in my OPM shoes. The project budget has contingencies built in for design. There are design contingencies, construction contingencies, and estimating contingencies. So I want to make sure that anybody listening to this understands that there's the cost of the project that you estimate in a very detailed way, but there are also these contingencies that are built into the budget so that if another event happened that is going to sort of make things go kablooey, you have a buffer against that. Because what I heard the last time around, it's not surprising, is that people think that the cost of the building costs, like if that changes, like, oh my God, well, no, I mean, a really well managed project is going to have contingencies to protect you against that if it does happen. And if those contingencies aren't spent, they aren't spent, right? It's like, like any like family budget that has like, the bucket that you go to when, somebody left the water running. Right? It's the same thing. The cookie jar, wherever the spare money is stashed. It has a line in the project budget on something like this.
Are you seeing significant delays in your timeframes right now as well, Margaret? Like in your Amherst project, for example, did you guys maybe plan for it to take, say, 3 years and now it's going to be 4.5 because of the supply chain issues?
No, the Amherst project is, the cost of that project is really going to be affected much more by the fact that it's probably going to be phased construction. They don't have swing space. And, this is a factor in your project as well. They don't have swing space to take the kids to. And when that happens, you start to get this very protracted, you do a piece, you move the kids around, you do a piece, you move the kids around. You have this potentially very protracted schedule. And that does add cost. It's mostly the cost of the contractor, the construction manager, because they're just on the site. It's duration related. So
I don't know that we would necessarily run into that same instance though, because we can't tear down Peck and piecemeal if we do end up on the Peck site. So we'd have to move all the students at once and do it as one project.
Yeah. And I mean, this is an important point of comparison between the two sites, because modular, I'm sure everybody's familiar with modular classrooms, which are the kind of simplest go-to option. In the previous project, we did include modular classrooms also for PEC, which also increased the price. Dave, to your point, I'd forgotten this piece. The problem with the modular classrooms is that the MSBA won't reimburse on temporary facilities, and which is really to encourage communities to figure out creatively whether there's a different way to house kids when you have a situation like PEC where you're potentially going to demolish a building and take it offline for several years.
I will add, Aaron, that John Switzett's currently, at the same time we were working at Holyoke, we were working on a project for Gardner. That project's in construction right now. It was on the same exact timeline, and they actually bid it during the height of COVID when nobody thought anything was going to happen, and the bids came in super low, and then things went the other direction on materials, and yet nonetheless it's been a challenging project, I'm sure, because they've had material struggles and timeline struggles, but it's actually still on track. And I think at the scale of a project you're talking about general contractors who know their supply chains and know who they're working with and have a lot more control. So it's very different than a smaller scale project where you're relying on what you can get at Home Depot or something. They have a lot more control.
I agree with that.
Hey, Mark, did you have your hand up a while ago, or?
I did, but I wasn't sure if it was an appropriate question here or later. I was just, you talked about one of the key components, what was to have an educational plan. Do we have an educational plan now for one school? And I know earlier on we talked about, we weren't sure if we were looking at 5 to 8 or 6 to 8, which I would think would be, at the early stages, we would like to know that just so we can, start to think about what we're gonna look at going forward for the schools.
We haven't written an ed plan. I do think that the work that the middle grades collaborative study team is a really important input into this. I also think another important input is in the recommendations of the dual language task force, which will of course need to involve parent involvement too. And Anthony's meeting with the school committee at the retreat in December to discuss options. So as opposed to like 5 or 6 years ago, I think we probably have more of an ed plan in place because of the iterative work that we've been doing. But we don't have one written, and there would still be opportunities for input, obviously.
The ed plan that was written for the previous project is a good point of departure because it describes a middle school curriculum, which that was sort of created as part of that project because you didn't have a middle school curriculum. So Steve brought in a very experienced middle school principal to help him with drafting that. But as Aaron points out, these other pieces need to get layered on top of. Well, the basic structure has to be examined for how, now that you have established middle schools, it has to be examined for like, is it working? Is that the fit? And then you have to layer on these other pieces.
Mark, you also mentioned the 5 to 8 versus 6 to 8. And my understanding is that your enrollment number is the same. So the capacity of the school and what it can support physically is the same if it's a 5 to 8 or a 6 to 8. I would think that's where if it would be required in this process, and when you, no matter whether you're kind of trying to retain parts of this design or not, that you work out what a 5 to 8 adjustment to the program looks like, to the space program. And there would be some, but I think that's shifting and kind of really, it's a little bit more about operational planning and probably potentially some space planning, but at the level of partitions rather than the level of the exterior walls in a sense, because the container still has to serve the same enrollment number. So it wouldn't radically change.
Okay, I just wasn't sure if, does 5 to 8, school allow you to close a school elsewhere to get operational efficiencies?
Yeah.
I don't know if you were looking at it at that level, as opposed to, the 6 to 8. That's all.
Mark, did you say, I didn't know if doing 5 to 8 allowed you to close a different school? Did I hear that right?
Yes, I just wasn't sure what was involved in this education plan. I thought it was looking at kind of, what does this look like if it's 5 to 8? Not just the school, but all the schools.
Yeah.
Do we get operational efficiencies elsewhere by doing this? Even if you had to go to 600 kids in this school, that's what I wasn't sure on as part of that education plan.
So I've been working with Anthony and Whitney on this for years, different portfolio analyses. And when we had to pivot when the vote didn't pass, we sent a letter to I can't remember, I think it was MSB or school committee or city council. Anyway, someone asked us to send a letter of different options, and we had 10 different options in there of what we could do if we built one school and what would that mean for all these others. And then since that time, I've looked at, and more options than that. There's so many iterations that will work. But some things some things we've held true that grade configuration's not would it make that big of a difference on is we still wanted about the same size middle schools, because we don't want too large, we don't want too small, because too large kids aren't known, too small, then you can't offer that variety of enrichment programming that we consistently want. So we kind of manufactured options that still allow us to meet some big goals that we continue to hear time and time again, not just this year, but over the course of the years. And then the other thing is the total number of pre-K to 8 kids remains the same. So it's if you have 3 middle schools of grades 5 through 8, then you probably have 5 elementary schools. Whereas if you have 2 middle schools of grades 6 to 8, you probably have 6 elementary schools. So they both equal out to 8. 8 because we're still trying to get towards closer to average size schools. We know our current capacities. So exactly which kids go where changes, but the overall structure of how many kids and having enough kids in each school, but not too many, having enough grades, but not too few, is kind of, we can make it so that it happens in either choice. We're talking about changes on the margins here rather than huge structural changes. I hope that is helpful, and I'm happy to sit down with anyone ever to look at the different, the portfolio analysis that we submitted to the MSBA back in 2019 or to this group. And I know that Anthony will be working with the school committee on that stuff, that the portfolio analysis and timing of any rezoning and stuff all too. Any other questions for Margaret or Dory or Christian? I know, Christian, you haven't had much of a chance to talk, so if there's anything you wanted to say, feel free.
I think Margaret and Dory covered it.
I just wanted to ask if Dory and Margaret might be available later for a subcommittee meeting for our subcommittee, and anybody who's new, who's new to all this, that we could ask more questions, because obviously I don't want to take up the time of people who've already gone through all this already.
I have a question. Margaret, is there a temperature that you have in terms of the rate from the MSBA? Or it has, I know when we were, meeting a while ago, the, square footage reimbursement rate, I think there was maybe some thought that they would bump that up. I'm wondering if you're hearing anything or what your thoughts are, given, how everything, COVID and things of that sort, just for us to have as something to work off of. I think it was $331 a square foot after.
It was 333 and now it's 360.
Yeah, 360. And actually, for anybody who's a data geek, I really want to encourage you to Google MSBA cost data. And there's this fantastic chart that they have of school construction costs, and it's kind of, you can click on it, like things pop up, but it gives you a really good sense of what the current projects are and what they're costing. I won't pull it up because the most fun you will have with it is looking at it on your screen and like clicking on things, but it's pretty easy to find. So take a look, and it'll help you see. And just to Dory's point, because I think they deserve some credit for this, one of the projects that is really, relatively quite low cost project is their project in Gardner, which was in parallel with this one originally. So when the boxes and X's and squares will tell you, who is involved with the project, what the cost was, what the duration was. So if you want to kind of get more of a feeling for that, that's a great place to look.
Thank you.
I just asked a question in terms of finance on that. You did say 360 a square foot, right? 360?
Yes.
So that's about 8% more. So is that, if we were doing the exact same design, does that imply that we will get 8% more funding from MSBA?
Well, again, the problem is, back to Aaron Brunel's question, is the cost of construction has gone up about 8%. So I would say they're probably in this particular move keeping pace with inflation. But overall, when you look at the chart, which does graph, their cap on reimbursement, it's drifted away. And I mean, that's for a real important reason, which is they're trying to stretch the money that they get. And actually, a brief sidebar, want to make sure everybody knows that this money, the state subsidy that comes from the MSBA, it's a penny of your sales tax. So every dollar of your sales tax, a penny, is going in this pot, which is then equitably distributed through a competitive and very fair process across the state. Communities that are poorer and have higher needs, have buildings in bad condition like Peck, they get into the system faster than districts like Brookline or Newton or Weston. Okay. So, but all of that being said, from where they started, when you look at this chart, you'll see the MSBA line along the bottom, and then you'll see the general trend of construction. And so that gap has grown. And it's important because when they cap construction costs at 360, Dory and Christian, what's the cost of your project in Gardner on a square foot basis right now?
The MSBA chart says 420, but I think it's a bit higher than that.
Okay. And I think when we projected these ones, it was in the neighborhood of 450 or 460. That delta, that has to be completely absorbed by the community. So it really helps when they raise it, but it's, Terry, unfortunately, it's against this other escalation that's happening.
Yeah, I know. I just came from a city council finance meeting, and that was as I was leaving, that was a question: is the percentage going up? But obviously, while the dollar amount per square foot's going up, the funding formula percentage wise is really not going up. So I know that's always been a concern. So
You mean the 80%? I haven't changed that.
yeah, no.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, they went for a long stretch. The last time they had raised the cost was in 2017, so it was almost 4 years. But I think the impact of the market must have finally moved them in the direction of raising it a bit.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, it would be nice if they raised that 80%, but at the end of the day, a community is responsible for its education of its youth and maintaining its buildings. And Holyoke already pays the lowest amount of net school spending out of any community in the Commonwealth. So, I mean, what are we showing to our community if we're not willing to pitch in to make sure our students have what they need at the end of the day, right?
I have 2 points. I think learning what I processed after the last go around is, and I would like for just a suggestion that we go in front of some things. Coming in January, we're going to have a very different makeup of the city council. And I know there was some concerns with the messaging and how 80% is for accelerated repair, and, you know, with the building project, you know, we do get the 80%, but you've got to look globally because the project is larger, and how that, you know, shakes out. So I think it would be helpful to come up with some strategies for some education, because we're activated now versus down the line. To allow for the new counselors and counselors coming on to really just get this and try to comprehend it is, because it can be confusing if you don't quite know what you don't know. That would be my first point. It's working with the city council. My second point is funding streams. I've been a proponent of working with our elected delegation to work with the governor and whomever in the state level to see if there are any stones that can be unturned for the city of Holyoke to help us with some funding for this project. Again, I think it would help to start conversations with Pat Duffy and Senator Vilas. I'm sure they're aware that we're reactivated again, but I think we need to start having these conversations and pressing upon our elected reps to advocate and not being reactive again later in the process, and to see if there are options that we have locally. I know that for me, I was frustrated with, you know, exemptions and what you can do and what you can't do. There's a lot of ARPA money out there. There's a lot of things out there. Is there something that we might be missing? Is there something that we can advocate for on the local level? Maybe a penny on the gas tax, a penny on the liquor and things that stay directly in this community that can be earmarked similar to the CPA. I think that we have to be in front of it. I definitely want to be part of that process. I think we can just try to reach out and advocate. And I think the sooner we do that in a cohesive manner where we're all, you know, in this together, I think is going to be beneficial, because we're now starting to get activated. Because I don't know what's in the pipeline. There could be things in the pipeline, and we may be eligible for something. There may be a grant just to help offset anything within the project total. So I would just say that I think we need the outreach and education with our new city council. some new, some not new. But I think that's important to be in front of it. And I also think it's important to be in front with our legislative delegation and to see whatever, you know, what can they offer us? What can they help us with? What's out there?
I just wanted to say that Senator Vilas and Representative Duffy are very much aware of the project and have been huge advocates and talk to MSBA way more than we do. So we actually wouldn't be to this stage without their active involvement, especially over this past calendar year. Just so folks know, of course, I think it's great to keep them engaged, and I'm looking forward to meeting with the city council. We have a subcommittee, a joint committee meeting scheduled for Monday, November 22nd, and starting at 6 o'clock. And hopefully the new city councilors who were elected, even if they're not officially on, will be able to, you know, would consider attending that meeting as well. And then this meeting will be taped for anyone who wants to watch it later. And hopefully that one would be taped too.
It could be good timing if they ever pass the infrastructure bill at the federal level.
Yeah, if I may, I just want to strongly second what Lori said and also point out, you know, even though unfortunately our net school spending is absolute dollar amount is very low, but if you take a look at it in terms of relative to per capita income, it's actually fairly high. So I just want to point that out.
Just looking at the agenda, I think it would be prudent for us to get kind of close out this session. The final question, which I didn't catch all the notes on, so I was hoping that Margaret and Dory could like concisely reiterate, but as we consider a financial allocation to enter into feasibility, how much money should the city set aside if we were to use the existing plans as the basis versus how much would it cost if we would start from scratch?
Well, I'll start, Dory, and you and Christian should chime in. I mean, again, I'm just looking back at where we were, where you were, with an $800,000 allocation. And I would think about the fact that it's several years further forward. So, you know, there's probably some escalation of that cost of services if it were the same. And then think about, you know, what's different. So if the committee thinks that you want to rehire Jones Woodset and, you know, pursue something that's fairly similar, you know, that's a good starting point. I probably would kind of say you should look at a number between $800,000 and $900,000 to give yourselves a buffer. I do think stuff does come up in the process. We didn't have any wiggle room in this, and it's good to sort of have the contracts and then be able to, you know, if you need to do an extra study or you know, there were some things that came up that we had to do extra testing and things for. Again, it's a weird conversation because so much of the risky stuff, the testing stuff, the other thing has been done. But I just want you to think of that as a placeholder and think about how this is different as a way of, you know, coming to an appropriation. And, you know, I think we could generate more detailed estimates for you that would help, but that's a good marker.
I think in some ways, Erin, it might require the conversation with the MSBA first in terms of what hoops we all need to jump through, right? So working with you to update the educational program, you know, that sounds reasonable. New cost estimates, regardless of what the scope is, certainly sounds reasonable. You know, we don't need to do another hazardous materials test if we're doing PEC again. maybe we'd have to do a new traffic study. You know, it gets into the nitty gritty of what has changed over the last few years. But I think that if the committee decides that they want to stick with the PEC site, that the size of the school is approximately correct, and the MSBA is willing to work with you on that, then I think the fee could be reduced from there. But I think Margaret has a good point of kind of where to start from if you were going to have to start all over again. And then the question is, how much do we need to redo, and how much can we just move forward with from doing it last time? I mean, I remember walking sites all throughout Holyoke with Whitney, and hopefully we don't need to do that again. But it was fun, but I don't think we need to do that.
So it sounds like we won't know exactly which direction we're going by the time we meet with city council. So we should probably ask for the higher number, worst case scenario, we're starting over allocation. And then if we don't use it all, it just goes back to the city council or to the city, I assume, correct?
I totally agree, Erin, because I think that is the safe thing to do. It's not what all communities do, but that's the safe thing to do, because there are still a lot of unknowns, but doing the appropriation helps set the project in motion. It doesn't mean that you're committed to spending all of that. And I had a lot of arguments over the years. People say, well, if we appropriate it, we'll spend it. It's like, no, you don't have to do that.
Right. So that's kind of the argument we need to lean in towards, because we may not have all the information by the time we go to that first meeting. I mean, granted, the funding won't get approved at that first meeting, but at least we start to try to, this is the expectation, and even explaining and understanding that what we don't spend comes back. And it's good to have you guys as resources if need be for that meeting, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Anthony, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't want to change it. I wanted to comment on the net school spending comment. So just to clarify to this committee and to clarify to anybody listening, net school spending has nothing to do with per capita income in the city. So net school spending is literally the amount, it has to do with your student demographic. So how many students do you have that are economically disadvantaged? What's your enrollment? How many special ed students? How many ELL students? And it's a formula driven by the state that says, this is the minimum amount that you by law have to spend on your school district. And we're funded at that level, regardless of what our per capita income is. What I think Mr. Yos may have been referring to is the amount of money that the city contributes towards that number is only about 12%. So 88% of our net school spending requirement is paid by the state, and only 12% is paid by the city. So maybe he was referring to that, but I do want to clarify, net school spending is just the minimum amount that the state requires you to pay for your student body based on your student demographic, regardless of income.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Anthony.
Dave?
That was more to my point.
Thanks, Dave. Lori? Or Erin? I'm sorry, Erin?
Oh, did Lori have something to say? I didn't see your hand
No,
up.
I think I just,
Okay.
you were right next to her on my screen.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Great. Well, I wanted to thank Dory, Christian, and Margaret for being here. We'll get back to you if we have questions. This is super informative. We all learned a ton. But you can sign off and get on with the rest of your evening while we do the rest of the agenda. Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Happy to meet.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I wanted to open it up to the group. We have two things left on the agenda. Curious which one you want to talk about first or focus on. There's discuss and determine possible next steps regarding the OPM RFP. Lori already gave us a lot of information on that, so I'm not sure if there was more talk about that people wanted, or we can share ideas on what to present or what information to share for the joint committee meeting on the 22nd at 6 o'clock. So where would people like to focus?
I would suggest you prepare for the meeting so that you provide as much information, both financially, educationally in terms of plans. Mark's question about would we be closing a building or two, and what that impact would be as we went along. I think all those are questions both from an educational standpoint in the interim, and then an educational standpoint and financial standpoint once you commit to the buildings and once the buildings are completed. So, you know, I really think a significant part of, and you know, Councilor Tallman can certainly attest to this, a significant part of City Council's view on this is going to relate to the money and how that fits. And so, you know, having that $800,000 to $900,000 figure, obviously, so we said 900 and we ended up being 700, that'd be a very good sign that we're really being fiscally responsible. But Aaron is correct. If we bond for 900,000 and then we only end up spending 700,000, the other money comes back. We don't end up paying another $200,000 to them just for whatever. But I think, you know, that's your next step. Is I mean, this committee is certainly involved and committed to trying to find the right path, trying to find the right building, trying to find the right educational design, and to try to do it within the financial means of the city. And the 8% increase in reimbursement per square foot sounds positive, but then when you consider it against the additional costs, it probably comes out as a wash. So I mean, I think when I first heard it tonight, I was thinking, oh, that's good news. But then when she put it in the other perspective, it was just the same thing. So, and you know, I think at least from the city council perspective, my expectation is they'll ask some questions about where and about what you're trying to do. But ultimately it'll be about, all right, how do we do it within our budget? And that committee will not get the actual bond proposal. That'll go to the finance committee, which is a whole separate committee. So.
Haven't we more or less already established that the funding, like that we're able to bond for it, like that the city can afford it? Because isn't like, didn't we verify that before we decided to enter into the process?
Based on the original cost factors. Yeah, I mean, they created a little inflation. I believe they were talking like the city's share was like 30 million. So, you know, if the city share is 35 million, then that's going to have an impact. Obviously, inflation, and hopefully we're going to come back, and maybe, I'm not saying they're going to come back to what they were 3 years ago, but, you know, as everything gets more normal in society, the hope would be that, you know, supply chains work better. We're not running out of things. We're getting deliveries. Expenses can somewhat go down. And then if the extra 8%, 8 cents or 8% reimbursement and the cost has gone down on square footage, then, you know, we're probably more. But, and those numbers were based on where we were at that point. So, I mean, obviously things are going to still change. And bond counsel, I spoke with bond counsel again last week about where we stand based on that. They were still in pretty solid, that the city was in solid shape, that we had done some things that had improved our situation. And so that they were still pretty positive that we were able to afford what the original PEC plan was. The only question becomes if in fact the cost is, let's say the cost goes up 10%, then more than likely the city could still afford it, but obviously that would have to be documented again, because the numbers would have changed and changed relatively dramatically if it's a 10% increase. But they have, with what they had before, yes, we were within it, and every time we've approved anything so far, you know, we just approved the refurbishment of the high school track. That still keeps us within being able to pay for that school bond.
Thanks, Terry.
Yep. Anthony? You're muted.
How many times have you heard that?
I don't want to tell you. That's one of
think
the things I'm looking
couple
forward to
things-
in my old age. I won't be Zooming.
A couple of things I think are going to be important for this meeting to share is one, like the fact that this committee has been formed and what we've been doing the last few meetings. I think it would be important to update the city council or the joint committee. You know, a quick summary of like the last 3 meetings that we had, and you know the whole story of really informing this board of the process. And then another thing that's going to be really important is a timeline, a detailed timeline of what the process is going to look like. I think that's 2 pieces of information that would be great to share with the committee.
Yeah, I agree with it. And I mean, just Councilor Tallman, Peter?
Yeah, thank you, Terry. I'm glad to be on this committee. I really think Terry said it well. What we have to do is as a council looking for basically the financials and where the school building is going to be. And I think Mark Lou brought up a good point. You know, the number of students, is it 5 to 8, 6 to 8? And is there going to be any savings with this one school? I know we're talking with the other 2 schools. If we went through, they were going to try to, you know, cut down maybe 1 or 2 buildings to get some cost savings. I think a lot of my colleagues want to know, is there going to be some savings with maybe 1 or 2 schools, you know, closing as far as, you know, the upkeep of the schools, the cost of running those schools and the numbers. I mean, I know it, you say 80%, but what it comes down to with the extra cost per square foot, it might come out to like 68% or something. And I think that's one thing that really has to be, you know, told to myself and a lot of my colleagues on the council, especially the newer colleagues, to understand this and just give us a basic view of, you know, what the time frame is and the money that's coming in. You know, because it's going to go to the finance committee. I'm a member of the finance committee, and I'm looking forward to that with Councilor McGivern in the next, you know, hopefully by December we can see something with this. And I know it's moving along, even though it's 2 to 3 years out. You know, this thing has to hit certain benchmarks each along the way. So I'm willing to you know, put my time in here and try to bring to the council anything that I get in this meeting. and taking some notes, you know, being my first meeting, but I'm willing to do what I can to chip in and to try to get a better understanding to try to build this school, you know, within the city budget.
Do we have a space on a subcommittee agenda for the finance committee yet?
I'm not sure if there is
There's not.
there's not, no.
Okay, because I know that Todd brought it up to the full council last week, but so I wasn't sure if we got referred out to both subcommittees or just the joint committee. So Peter, maybe that's something you can do for us, is get us onto that committee's agenda.
Yeah, I think it's going to the joint committee.
Yeah, it's just the joint.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's.
As of right now,
So if we want to meet with finance sooner than later, we can work on getting on that agenda too for early December. That way we have this meeting, we know what we need to do from there, and then we already have the date in mind for the subcommittee for finance.
Yeah, as you start to look at numbers and finance, Mark, I'll get right to you, okay? As you start to look at those numbers, I know Mayor-elect Garcia is here, and I know he's gonna be kind of put thoughts in front of the finance committee, and obviously that will be a partnership because it has to start with the mayor's office. So eventually, when we're reviewing the actual numbers, that's where they come from. Can we review it beforehand? You can, but you're going to get, based on my experience, and Peter, you correct me if I'm wrong, there's much more detail when you actually put the actual numbers. Like we could suggest the 900,000 as this is what we're going to be looking for. But at that point, it's kind of like an open discussion. But when the actual bond comes and they start reviewing it, with all respect, the financial aspect gets looked at much more seriously. So, I mean, I don't necessarily think you're going to gain any traction by going in without actually saying, this is 900,000, this is what we want to do. And let's get the council to support that. That's just my opinion.
It's 2 steps though, right? We're asking for the initial feasibility study money at one point, and then the bond conversation is later down the road when we have exact project costs. Am I correct or wrong?
Yes, no, you're correct, but the bond, but it would still more than likely end up being a bond.
Right, so, but I guess my question for clarity and process purposes
Yeah.
is, wouldn't we want to get in front of finance before the end of the year, certainly, to work on getting the feasibility study money? Aaron, do we have a deadline for that?
Aaron, did you hear that?
We looked at that last, we looked at that at the last meeting, I believe April 16th was there was supposed to be a meeting. Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, that we have to have it by April 16th, but we would like to do it sooner because we mapped out all of the city council meetings, and the later we do it, the further the project gets pushed back. So Aaron, there we go.
Right here. So if the absolute deadline's the April 29th. But assuming kind of 2 weeks of working with the council, it'd be great to do it earlier though. You know, January 31st or March 28th would allow us to hit the March 2nd or April 27th board meeting.
Right, but that's when it's going to be presented to full council, right? So we need to meet with subcommittee. So that way then that subcommittee can vote on it and then bring it back to the full council for that January date. So that's why I was suggesting that we at least get it in their agenda, hopefully for December. So that way it's back to the full council, say January, to meet those deadlines, right?
Yeah, it gets more complicated. We've been told now that we can deal with only the items, and Peter, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I know we've had only items that are during that council calendar year can be dealt. So if we dealt with it and we file something now, we'd have to adopt it before the end of December, or it goes into what they call it, a rainy jack or something. So it would have to start. But the other aspect of that, and in terms of building support with the new council, if Mayor Garcia were to file it for the first meeting in January, my speculation is you would have that full brand new city council, the ones that are going to have to vote on it one way or the other, getting all of the information and also having their voice in their vote, and it should be able to be done before the end of January.
You mean we go to subcommittee and back to the full committee all within the month of January?
Yeah, they should. Let's say, I don't know what the first meeting in January is, but if the first meeting in January was say the 3rd or 4th, there, and the president named the committee, ordinarily they would meet either the next Monday or the Monday immediately before the next city council meeting to go over whatever is on that jacket. So, and unless there were, I would say 9 out of 10 times what goes to the committee and finance, once they have the hearing, it gets either adopted or denied the next meeting. So it's very possible in a 3-week period that all of that could happen. Peter, I'm sorry, Mark and then Peter.
No, I just wanted to clarify. So the what you're talking about is going before the finance committee for the money for the OPM. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, and when do we as a body have to decide what we're gonna do, as opposed to, do we go back out to bid, or do we go forward with the OPM as, I think a lot of people probably want to on this committee. And, I don't like to wait. I like to move things along.
Yep. I would think
based on what
I would think you got to make, if you made a decision at the end of November, these are how we want to do this OPM. This is what we want to do. Then all the rest of the pieces would come before the mayor, and then whatever that potential cost was.
Okay, so if we voted at our December meeting, whether we're going to go with the current OPM or go back out to bid for an OPM. Okay, let's just say we voted to stick with the current OPM, then we would negotiate with them, or the city would negotiate with them what the fees would be going forward, correct?
That would be my expectation, yep.
Yeah, okay,
If we
so,
were only going in that direction, yes.
yeah, so technically by January, we could actually have the actual dollar amount before the city council.
Yep.
And not have to, no, Aaron?
No, so we're going to the city council for two things. One is like vote authorization language, which is linked in the agenda. And then it's amount of money to enter into feasibility. So it's more than the OPM, it's the OPM and designer cost. So it doesn't help us to,
Right,
I
but
mean,
so,
like,
I'm sorry.
if we decide a little bit, a really important part is going to be talking to we wouldn't really be able to do this by December because the MSBA wants to talk with the new mayor. So like, it's good. It's really great that we're on the joint committee meeting for November. But if we don't get to finance council till January, that's fine. That's fine too. I think we're going to learn a lot from the MSBA meeting with Mayor Garcia.
Councilor Tone?
Yeah, I think that's going to be a good, I mean, it could be difficult, as you know, Terry, and when we have a new council president, they got to name the committees. I think we got 7 new city councilors. So there's going to be a big change there, and who's going to be on the committees, who's chairing the different committees. But I think, December's a busy month too. We're setting the tax rate, we're finding out the free cash. It's going to be a busy time. Sometimes we don't set the tax rate till close to Christmas. We've done it a couple times, Christmas Eve. But I think it's important that we're going to hear, from this committee to the joint committee, the school committee and the council, what direction we're going. And I think January would be a perfect time to try to get things moving along. And hopefully we'll have the committee set. But like I said, we don't know who the council president's going to be. And all the committees are going to be totally different. It's not like we can just continue with the committees because there's 7 new people on there. But funding money wise, that's something that as long as we can do it hopefully by the end of January, I think we'll be okay.
And more than likely, you never know, obviously. More than likely, whoever gets chosen president of city council will within a week have the committees signed up. And there'll be an agenda, and usually they're pretty quick at getting right into it. So the second meeting in January, their second full council meeting, they're starting to deal with committee reports. So, and if I can just make one, go ahead, Lori.
Thanks, Terry. I want to echo Mark's input in terms of keeping things going forward. Is it possible for us to vote up or down on maintaining the current OPM and designer at our December meeting? Is there anything compelling that we couldn't do that? So at least we have a direction of where we're going.
So as a point of order, Lori, you could make a motion to vote on anything at any time that you feel it's appropriate. So, if you wanted to say have it on the agenda, and then Aaron could help determine what work we need to do to get to that point. But theoretically, you could make a motion right now to vote on that. I don't think we're ready, but I'm just letting you know that as for the structure of the committee, you can make a motion to vote on something at any point in time.
Thank you.
And to sister on to that, I would like to get a good heartfelt feeling from the committee. What is your perception of what you've heard tonight? What more information may be applicable, may be helpful? And how can we go about to give individual members a peace of mind in knowing that they've been able to explore the various components towards starting over again or continuing the existing relationship with the OPM and the designer? It's a little near the end of the meeting now, but it's a great opportunity for people to, do you have a comfort feeling with that? With what you've heard tonight? You can see the amount of detail that's gone into it. Some of you have looked deeply into the 900 pages worth of information that was submitted to the MSBA previously on our behalf. Good money has paid for already. I don't think it's going to be as expensive as Margaret had said. She said that was to start the process over again. I think that it'd be far significantly less than that amount. And we do need to drill down with that. I understand we have some questions for the MSBA to see what their requirements are, but how do people feel about what they heard tonight?
We could take a quick poll on that, I assume, or maybe Aaron can send out a poll via email post meeting and see.
Yeah,
Unless,
I think having Aaron send out an email and just kind of getting everybody's thoughts and kind of giving you a chance to put it maybe in a paragraph. This is what I think is good. This is, maybe we look at this. And I do think all of that can certainly get finalized early in December, which is certainly within the time frame that you need to really have this information. Councilor Ward 2, Councilor-elect Puelo, my successor.
Thanks, Terry. Big shoes to fill. Yeah, I mean, listening to Whitney definitely makes me feel a little better when he says that the cost is going to be a little bit less. But I think when we're talking about being responsible and talking about presenting to the council, I mean, people are going to say if we're bonding for something and we think it's going to be a lot less, maybe we shouldn't be bonding for that. So when we ask questions like, hey, do we have to do a soil study, or is there going to be another traffic study? And people say, I don't know, I don't think that's a good perception. So these are questions I think we should definitely have answers to before we go up and say, we want to borrow 900 grand. I mean, it's almost $1 million. So, I mean, that's a little concerning to me because we were told it was going to be a little bit less. So I think moving forward, we should definitely make sure that we have a lot of these answers first so that we know if we have to bond less, because I'm sure there's going to be people on the council that are going to say, oh, well, responsibility, this and that. And then the second thing I was going to say was, yeah, it was a good meeting. It was a good meeting. It was good to see everybody. And I was curious about what schools we were going to close. Because we keep going back to the education plan, and then whether we're going to use Peck or Lawrence, and we didn't get to see the Lawrence site today. I think a couple of people wanted to see that Lawrence design. I think that's really important because we're not 100% locked into Peck yet. That's important to mention. So
I think to reiterate what Anthony said, though, the proposal was submitted to the MSBA for the PEC site. So if we look into other sites, that'll be for Anthony and Aaron to let us know, like if that would change the scope of the project, right?
I don't think it would, right? We were told that we can go ahead and build somewhere else. It doesn't necessarily need to be Peck.
Anthony?
They're studying Peck. As part of the statement of interest, they're studying Peck. What I said was, that doesn't mean that that's where construction is going to happen, but they're going to be looking at Peck programming. They're going to be looking at Peck, like everything that's
grade
going
spans
on
there.
Peck. Yeah, the grade spans there and everything. Now, where we decide to do construction, that's a completely separate question. But they're not going to be interested in looking at Lawrence as part of this, because Lawrence is an elementary school, grades pre-K to 3, and that's not what we asked them to review. We submitted a statement of interest to review Peck.
So as far as this,
I can get the slides from from the architects. It just was like 3 slides on Chestnut, but I do want to iterate, you have all the information that you need on Chestnut. That was all in the background material. So we're not holding that information back from
maybe if we can talk about the demolition costs and, the topography costs and things like that. I mean, I think that's really important too, for everybody to understand before we vote on it, because it's going to raise the cost a little bit.
Mm-hmm. One other point about the Chestnut Street site though is, and I'm pretty certain that agreement ends on January 31st, where the city would be able to make sure that we had a reserve for a school site. I'm pretty certain it ends this December 31st. So if that is in fact any consideration, Mayor-elect Garcia, I would suggest that as you get in, you may want to sit down and see if we can extend that another year before these decisions are made. I know, as we've talked about this, the Peck site has been the primary focus. And so the December 31st deadline for the Chestnut Street site is something that if it is under consideration, then we need to see if we can extend that option available to the city.
Yeah, and to add too, I mean, we were also told the MSBA won't reimburse for temporary lodging. So I think that's pretty important too.
Yep. If I could just throw a couple other things out that I think would be important, and I think what school we might close or schools that we might close. I know in the bonding council, and Anthony, I think this is very important, that the idea of a $500,000 annual commitment from the schools is emphasized that that is a firm commitment. That's not going to change from year to year, because that is part of the financial package that was put out. And then whatever schools are closing, what those potential savings are would also be something that I think. And then where and this is, I know this was the question when the 2 schools were being proposed, and it was equity. And so with one school, how do we try to make sure that we provide as equitable an educational quality in whatever school any child is in, so that and that obviously is part. Is it going to be 5 to 8, 6 to 8, and then what does that impact? Whichever way you go, whatever buildings you close, what does that do in impacting the other grades as well? So those are all part of the educational quality that, you know, when I first started talking to people, that I thought was important to be discussed, because it has an impact. Some students are not going to a new school. There's no question about that. So, but how do we do it and make sure that they get a choice that's a quality choice wherever they're going to be?
Yeah, so the district, as you know, has been working on the middle school plan, because that was presented last time. And as Aaron said, we're also working on the dual language plan. And then the school committee has a retreat planned for early December, which one of the main focuses on that is going to be for the school committee and the receiver to decide whether we're going 5 to 8 or 6 to 8. So after our school committee retreat on the 12th, we'll, as a school district, not this committee, as a school district, we'll have more firm information for this committee to say, this is the district's plan. This is what the district's planning. This is whether we get a new building or not is how we're going to be planning, because this new building's not promised, right? So we're going to have a plan ready for this committee and for the city as a whole to give you guys an idea of, we're transitioning to middle schools, and hopefully by this fall. So what buildings are coming offline, what buildings are being consolidated, how students are going to shift around. So hopefully most of that will be worked out at this retreat. I mean, not to the finite, but at least, you know, some decisions will be made. So this committee as a whole, this committee, you know, there's certain decisions that this committee won't necessarily be responsible for making, but it will be important information for this committee to decide the best school building choice for the city.
And the committee also then can become more of an advocate for the plan. And I think that's important, that they understand that the full information is out there. This is what we're looking to do. And I would say, this is what we're doing. If we build a new school, this is what we're doing while we're building a new school. And this is what we're doing if we don't end up with a new school. So that all those aspects are out there. So there are complete information as you can get. Obviously, things are going to still change. But the more information that's out there, the more the book is open, the better the read you're going to get from the community. And I keep emphasizing community knowledge has to be universally shared.
Well, the book is open because our meetings are public and they're on TV and they're recorded, and anybody can come and anybody can get a Zoom link, and we encourage as many people from the public to attend the meetings as possible.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. But then, as you are meeting with people on the street, that you know what's going on. Now you've got information. This committee has information which they now can be sharing, which then spreads to the other people that they're seeing in their community. And again, that just provides a potential for more significant support in terms of what's going on. Aaron?
It's also updated on our website, hps.holyoke.ma.us/MS redesign. We always do that within a few days of these meetings. It takes a long time to type up 2 hours of notes and summarize it. Mayor Murphy, I did want to point out that without you here, I did not move to approve the meeting minutes or something, since I'm not a member of the committee. So I didn't know if you wanted to go to.
Can I have a motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting?
Oh, well.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. And just if I could, I know we're relatively ready to wrap up, right, Aaron?
Yep, I was just going to remind you the next meeting dates, and then
why don't you
everybody
do that, and then I'll talk. Go ahead.
Next meeting dates are December 2nd And then it'll be the first Thursday of the month thereafter, except for January, because January 6th is Three Kings Day. Let's move it to Thursday, January 13th. With a reminder to complete the state ethics training. I've gotten a lot of those forms, so thank you. I'll keep them on record. And I'll get these notes out to you guys within a week, and then get that little kind of survey thing out about your input on the OPM and designer.
What about
Go ahead, Aaron.
any structure for the subcommittees? For meeting schedules?
Yeah, I'm going to, as you know, this is it for me and Mayor Garcia. I know he's told me he's going to be actively involved. So I also think you're now getting to the point where the subcommittees are going to have more input, because we're starting to get into where you got to make some decisions. So I would agree with that, Aaron.
Yeah, I mean, I know the chairs have been
Yep.
appointed, so the chairs need to take on that responsibility of
Yep.
scheduling subcommittee meetings and then coming up with agendas. And I would suggest that you work with Aaron Linville possibly to come up with the agendas, but we need to start seeing subcommittee meetings being held.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. So, and you got a month to kind of, in that month, if you all did that, that would be good. Mark?
In regard to subcommittees, agendas, is the full committee gonna send specific items to the subcommittees to look at? Or do we just meet and we randomly talk about stuff? You know, and I don't want to randomly meet and talk about stuff and waste time, as opposed to having specific items to discuss so we can get more in depth and, you know, really hone in on what the subject matter is.
Yeah, I would think Aaron Linville can kind of coordinate those subcommittees. This is where we're at. These are information that's come in since that you need to be able to have a chance to review it. You may also do, especially those that are in the design stage, might start, you know, looking at other designs that have been out there. You might make a couple of visits. I don't know what kind of, you know, to me, that makes sense, just to see what the other options are out there, even though looks like you're probably staying the same designer and probably a similar plan. You never know. But I would suggest if the chair of the committee just kind of touch base with Aaron and she can kind of go over, these are the kind of things that are going to be coming up that you need to be reviewing. And then the committee could review that separately and then come and make a report back to the full council. The other question on that, because and I would ask you to defer to the city solicitor, is just to verify. I mean, we've announced these meetings, but I'm not sure if all those subcommittee, they might very well be required to be also subject to the full open meeting law. So, and I'm not absolutely certain, because this group has some authority. The subcommittee has no official authority, if you will, other than trying to coordinate some information to this one.
And they're called working groups.
Yeah, there you go. So if
who's
I can,
who's going to get that clarification from the city solicitor?
well, if this Aaron, not that one, either, but this one down on the bottom, Aaron Linville, who I'm pointing to, if you can't see my screen, she's at the bottom of my screen. If she asks me, I can ask. You know, I'm going to go back tomorrow and say, what were we talking about? So I'm going to depend on her to give me that information. But if I can, I know this, I want to say a few things. I want to thank you all for volunteering, first of all. You stepped up. You know, it was a tough choice for me to make selections. I had a lot of very good people, and I tried to make sure to get all of the input. And I want you to offer your ideas and your complaints or your suggestions as you move along. But I want to thank you for volunteering and showing up. And, you know, not everybody comes out and volunteers. So I do want to personally thank you. It's been my pleasure and my honor to be able to serve with you, and I wish you the best. Mayor Garcia, I ask you to take the lead and recognize it's essential in terms of leadership that you be here. And I know there's going to be some conflicts, but you got to be here. You got to find a way with very, very rare, and I'll be watching. The old guy's watching you. So you just, follow up on that and, just stay together. You can disagree and you will. Why aren't we doing this instead of that? Just respect each other's opinions. Respect why they're there, why they're trying to make that opinion made. They're trying to do what they think is best for the community. So, and that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry.
Thanks, Terry.
Thank you, Terry.
And I guess we can take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion adjourned.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Opposed? No? Okay. Everybody. Oh, Whitney, are you saying you're opposed?
Whitney opposed.
Thank you very much.
Not
You all take
debatable.
care. Stay safe. Stay well. You got friends. Try to get them healthy. Let's get the
Wait, is that
vaccination
Mr.
ready up.
Collmore with you?
Yeah.
is Mr. Collmore.
I thought so. I
Yeah.
just wanted to make sure. Have a good evening, Mr. Collmore. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Have a good
Good
night.
night,
Good
everybody.
night, everybody.
Good night.